Today I'm going to walk you through drawing realistic leaves in colored pencil. Hi, I'm Lisa, the artist behind Lachri Fine Art. It is part 2 of my hummingbird drawing. This week we are going to focus on the leaves and the berries. All of the supplies that I used are linked below in the video description. If you are supporters over on Patreon, make sure to head over where the 2-hour version of this tutorial is available for you now, complete with voiceover. Now, onto this tutorial. So starting off, I forgot to turn my camera on for the first couple of leaves. I'm just layering this. This is going to go fairly quickly. I will have some that slow down so you can see a little bit better how I'm layering everything. But I'm adding a layer of color. I don't worry about it being the exact right color. I just need something fairly close, get my values pretty close to where I want. I blended out with Mona Lisa odorless paint thinner. That is what you see me using whenever you see the paintbrush. That's what's on that paintbrush. Any odorless mineral spirits will work the same. Gamsol, for example, works great. And I'm blending that out, which just smooths everything out. It covers the white of the paper really well, so I don't have that grainy, gritty look. Now, the first few layers will look grainy and gritty. That's totally normal. It's going to take me a couple of layers, and by a couple, I mean like 5 times of blending out, adding more layers, blending out, adding, 3 or 4 more layers. It takes a lot of layers to get to this final stage that you're seeing here. Now, on this paintbrush, I have a mixture of titanium white colored pencil powder mixed with the brush and pencil touch-up texture mixture. I'll have a link to a video in the video description showing you how I use that and where you can get that product. But this is made specifically for colored pencils, so it works great for painting on those white highlights and white details that we otherwise can have quite a bit of problem getting. And look how it makes that leaf just pop out from the one behind it. It pulls it forward by putting these white details on top of it. As I move on to the berries, I am going to be using a lot of pinks and this kind of orangey brown pumpkin color. I don't even know what it's called, but I'm mixing a lot of colors to get a lot of values in here. I don't want them to just all be solid red. That would look very flat. And the same thing with the leaves. One of the biggest things you can take away from this is how many different shades of green I'm using. I'm using pretty much every green that I own in both luminance and polychromos. There are so many greens, so many values in building up so that I end up with an end result that looks very realistic. If I just found one shade of green that seemed perfect and put it everywhere, I'm going to have very flat leaves. So you can see I used a lot of pinks along with the reds and that golden color. I blended that out with the paint thinner, and then I'm going through with a very sharp pencil and adding my details. I'm using some black, but at no point do I leave anywhere just solid black. I'm going to be layering reds and purples and blues over the black so that it's not totally flat. Taking my white luminance here to get some details on these berries, and I will come back through and paint on that mixture of touch-up texture and titanium white like I did on the leaf just a second ago. I will be doing that on these berries as well once I get a little further into this. That mixture, when you make it, it dries out fairly quickly, and even when you put a lid on it, it's not going to store well. So I don't mix the mixture that I want until I'm ready to use it, and in this case, I'm going to wait until I have a few leaves to work on at the same time that are going to need it. So this one here, we're going to slow down just a bit so you can see a little bit better how I'm layering. I'm going to use my brown pencil and I'm marking in or blocking in where the veins are. Now notice that they're not perfectly smooth. I want this to be kind of messy, very sketchy so that it looks more realistic. Portions are going to be much darker than others and some are going to be a lot lighter. I'm now blocking in the veins on this leaf, the really light ones. Now when I come back through with the green, I'm going to go over all of this. The dark, the light, all of the brown will be covered with the green. The veins that I have there are going to be very subtle how they show through. Anything that I need to make a bit darker or a bit more bold with those veins, I can come back later. But this gives me a very nice texture for my base layer of these leaves. This luminance pencil you're seeing me use here is spring green, and that is one color that I used on pretty much every leaf, along with all of my other greens. But I mean, that was kind of the base color that I used largely for everything. And again, you can see I've got a lot of other greens mixed into that. Now, so for the first layer, I've got several layers of green, and now I'm blending that out with the Mona Lisa odorless paint thinner. Once that dries completely, I can go on to my next layers. And it will look like it's a lot darker while it's wet from the paint thinner. As it dries, it'll lighten back up to the real, what color you'll actually end up with. So now adding more, I've got to get quite a bit of pigment on this paper in order to get that true rich color that you're seeing on the previous leaves that are finished. Lots and lots and lots of layers. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that people make when they're blending with the odorless mineral spirits and they're not happy with the results they're getting. They don't have enough layers. They're just calling it finished too soon. I mean, really look at how much pencil I'm putting on there in between each time of blending out with the odorless mineral spirits. And even then, I blend out with the odorless mineral spirits, 3, 4, 5 times. It takes a lot of layers. Now, I've used a reddish brown for the edges of these leaves. This is a fall scene, or the photo was taken in fall, so the leaves are starting to turn. And I did pull a little bit more brown and red into mine than what was in the reference photo, just because I liked how that looked. I'm using the side of the pencil to get this very mottled, very sketchy look. Now, if I wanted completely smooth blending, I'm going to keep my pencil very sharp and I'm going to use the tip of it. But there I was trying to build texture, and so using the side of the pencil worked really well, and it gives me a little bit of that grainy, gritty texture that I want for that leaf. Now for the edges, that background, if you remember from last week, that was airbrushed, and I used masking fluid to mask off the edges. I didn't do a perfect job. It wasn't as detailed as what I need here. So I just take a color that's very similar to the Createx airbrush paint, whatever color was in the background, and work that into it so I can define those edges, get them nice and clean. It's a lot easier to do that than to try to control the masking fluid and get it completely perfectly shaped. Coming back through here with some of my shadows, better defining everything, making sure to separate one leaf from the next. Blending that out again with odorless mineral spirits. Look how dark my shadows are in between a lot of these leaves, especially the dead one up above where I'm working. Those shadows are very, very dark, and that may feel scary to do on your work, but if you can get your contrast really dark, your dark's dark, your light's light, it is going to make your work look so much more realistic and be so much more interesting to look at. It doesn't matter how perfectly you have everything drawn and shaded. If you don't have the contrast needed, it's never really going to look that interesting or that realistic. I'm using my Derwent Drawing Chinese white, which is a very, very opaque white, to get some of the highlights on this leaf. I will get my brightest highlights where I paint the touch-up textured titanium white mixture, but for a lot of these where I don't need it to be completely white, this works great. Either my Luminance white or my Derwent Drawing Chinese white are my pencils I go to lighten an area without making it white. So now I'm painting that touch-up texture titanium white mixture. Again, I'm using a liner brush. This is a number 2 synthetic hog-haired liner brush. This is the generic one from Hobby Lobby. I love their generic paintbrushes. As much as I hate generic art products, I love these generic paintbrushes. You can see I'm going along the edges of these veins, and what it does is it makes it look like the light is catching portions of that, so it looks like part of the vein is deeper in the leaf. It's making it look very three-dimensional. And I don't just want to outline everything. I want to pay attention to my reference photo, where my highlights are, where those details should be. As you can see, as I do these highlights, it's sporadic. It's just a little bit here and there. I'm not evenly outlining my edges. It's just a bit here and there on those edges. That is really important in making your work look realistic. I remember when I first started painting and drawing, when I would put a highlight on something, in my head it said, go all the way around the edge of that leaf, go all the way along that branch. The whole thing should be highlighted evenly or shaded evenly. That doesn't look natural. That doesn't look realistic. And here I've got multiple light sources. There are 3 or 4 light sources in this photo because of the way that the light is bouncing off the sidewalk up to the leaf, then the actual sunlight, and then I've got light coming from the building behind it, which it was bouncing off of. There was light hitting this everywhere. So this one, it would not make sense for me to have anything perfectly lined. And that's going to be the case in most situations anyway. You're rarely going to have something perfectly lined all the way around the edges when you're doing your highlights or shadows. So really watch that. Now this portion is extra fast because this was from our live stream. I will have a card pop up if you want to watch that portion in real time. Now we are moving on to the next leaf, and we're going to move a little bit quicker through the rest of these because it really is a rinse and repeat process where I'm just blocking in my shadows and my highlights. I blend it out, add more layers, and just continue to build up until I get the end result that I want. These leaves took me a couple of weeks to finish. They were such a slow process. That is something to really keep in mind when you are working in colored pencil, and especially this is a larger piece, it's a 16 by 20. But when you're working in colored pencil, it is a slow medium. It appears in these videos that it goes very quickly. It does not. If you're trying to get something to look very, very realistic, take all of the time you need to make that happen. Don't think that you're going to get something like this done in a night or two. It's just not going to happen. So just plan on spending a long time, take your time, work slow. And I like to finish one leaf at a time or a couple of leaves at a time before I move too far, just because it gets frustrating. You will get burnt out very, very quickly if you stay in the ugly stage too long. And in a piece like this, that's this large, that ugly stage, if you're kind of evenly shading in all of the green on all of the leaves, then all the brown on all of the leaves, and doing the same thing on each leaf as you move through, much how I might with a painting, it just takes so long, and that ugly stage lasts what seems like forever. So you may get to a point where you just don't want to finish it because it feels like it's never starting to look better. But here, as you can see, I've worked slowly, one section at a time, so that one section is complete before I move on to another. And that helps me to take the time needed and feel like I'm actually progressing versus just having an ugly stage that lasts for 2 weeks. Because it really, any area that I'm working on, it doesn't start to look good until the very end of that layer. I'd say maybe the last 10% of working on a leaf is when it starts to look like how I want it to. But that first 90%, it just looks terrible. So imagine having this whole piece look terrible for 2 weeks before you start getting to the good part. Just break it up slower. It'll make it much easier to tackle, much less overwhelming. I'm using a lot of yellow where I'm going, especially on the leaves up front, I'm taking a yellow and I'm going over the greens that I've done. It warms up the color and it kind of pulls it all together. So I still have my browns, I still have my greens, but they're all tinted that same yellow. So same thing here, just blocking in my lights and my darks. Lots and lots of layers before I blend out with the odorless mineral spirits. I'm making sure to let that dry. You don't want to take your pencil over paper that is wet from the odorless mineral spirits because it can damage the tooth of the paper. The great thing about working with odorless mineral spirits is that you don't ever damage the tooth of the paper. You're working with such a light hand all the time. But if you start working the pencil over a wet area, sometimes it'll seem like, yay, there's so much pencil is coming off so easily. The problem is you're not going to get many layers on top of that because you just damaged the paper. Let it dry all the way. And it doesn't take long. On paper like this is the Fabriano Artistico extra white hot pressed, name's way too long, watercolor paper. It dries within a minute or so depending on how much paint thinner is on my brush. Same thing with the berries, just defining those. These guys are in shadow, so I've got to make them pretty dark. Much more so than the previous ones that I had drawn. And just like the other ones, start layering by adding my detail, the veins, then the greens on top. Lots of greens, blending that out. And you can see, look how fluorescent and ugly that looks when I start out. Those first few layers, don't freak out if it's not the exact end result color that you want. You're going to get there. It's a layering process. Just layer till it looks good. And one of the questions that I'm asked so often is, how do you know which color to use? Don't stress yourself out so much about that. Pick a color. If it's not looking how you want, layer another color over it until it looks good. But as you can see, the colors that I started with were way too bright. That's not where I ended up or wanted the leaf to end up. But it is where I started. It's not a big deal. Don't stress yourself out about it. It's not perfect yet. Just layer until it is. I'm now coming through with the Touch Up Texture Titanium White mixture again and adding my final details. Using that same liner brush. I pretty much just use that liner brush. I don't have a huge selection of paintbrushes that I use when I paint this on. That one works for everything for me. Getting some highlights on those berries. One thing that I don't think you're going to see in the video is that I went back through, once I put these highlights on there, I think I forgot to turn my camera back on, I went back through with a lighter pink to tone the berries down because I didn't just want white highlights. I wanted to actually lighten portions of the berries up all together. And the nice thing is that touch-up texture mixture that I'm doing here, it adds tooth to the paper. So I can, once this is dry, it's made for going on top of it with colored pencil. So I can lighten this area up and then take a light pink and have it show up really, really well. Whereas if I had just taken the light pink over the dark areas, that light pink was too translucent. It wouldn't have shown up, but it showed up great over the white that I painted on there. And there is my finished piece. If you want to see real-time versions of portions of the leaf and part of the first hummingbird, I will have links to the live streams below in the video description. And of course, I've got the 2-hour versions of each of those videos over on Patreon, so you can check that out as well. I've also got the prints for this one available in my print shop, and I will have a link to that in the video description. My husband is so mean. He sent me a text just now of a picture of a tree at the store, a potted Christmas tree. It's all hanging. I love droopy plants. Why would you send me a picture of one? I don't have room for another. He continued to tell me that we don't need another plant. Why did you send me the picture? Why would you do that to me? That's just mean. Then he sent a picture of him waving at it and saying goodbye to Herbert. He named it. He named it and didn't bring it home. That's just, oh God, now he says it had sparkles. How did you not bring home a tree that had sparkles on it? It's like it was made for me. Hey, did you subscribe yet? Because if you did not, there's a button right there. You can hit it and keep up with all of my art videos. There are 5 new videos, 5 times 5, not 10. Why do I keep doing so many times? I keep saying that there's 5 and I'm showing 10 fingers. I can't count, clearly. 5 new videos, 5 times a week. 5 with 10 because it's extra exciting.